Morning, guys. Well, it is early. It's 06:37 on a Saturday morning. Latish start for me, but I'd rather get the dog walking early than have to dash around later on in the day trying to make sure that he gets walked. Anyway, that's my personal admin out of the way. Anyway, today is when we actually start to find out just how much of a ramble I can have as I ramble. So what I was thinking as I was driving in this morning was, what subject should I talk about? And yesterday, whilst cruising YouTube, I saw a brief clip of Adam Driver, the actor, talking about the difference he found when he left the US Marine Corps compared to civilian life. And yeah, I found it quite surprising that Adam Driver was a US Marine. But when you hear him talk about that, you can tell fully that that guy was a US Marine. And if you've ever worked with the US Marine, they're an intense bunch, but a highly professional and proud bunch. I suppose a bit like the Royal Marines as well, except we're probably slightly more specialized than they are, just purely because of their size. If you look at their size, they're close to 180,000 active personnel, whereas the Royal Marines is 6. So yes, both specialist organizations. Anyway, I digress, as I always do on these things. One of the things that really surprised me is if you want a more diverse change of jobs, you won't get much more than the US Marine Corps to acting, and a very, very good actor. So the US Marines taught him one thing, which was working to the best of his ability. Anyway, but he was talking about the difference between the two. So I thought, hey, why not I talk about my experiences in the difference between the military, and specifically the Royal Marine Commandos, and civilian life, because I've got a different take on it. Because not only did I change from the military to Civvy Street, but I also changed continents and went half a world away. Went from the UK all the way through to New Zealand, which has its own complications as well. But yes, if you start looking at some of the leaders that I worked under in the Marines, they've all gone through a form of selection. And one of the big things that they have is we all have a similar mindset. We all have a similar approach to leadership. It's taught to us. I wouldn't say it's beaten into us, because we all have a slightly different framework and approach. We have our own different foibles. But on the whole, 80 to 90% of all of the leaders, including officers and NCOs or non-commissioned officers, that's your corporals, sergeants and the like, have all been very, very elite and good leaders to a man. I would almost put it to. Yes, I've worked for a couple of fucking idiots, but I have to say the number of idiots that I've worked for in Civvy Street makes the Royal Marines ones pale by comparison. The leaders on the whole, and the leadership on the whole in the Royal Marines, and I've maybe been spoilt, obviously, because of the selection process and the training process that we go through, compared to Civvy Street, where they're not trained. They come from different walks of life, but it's astounding sometimes how some of these things work out. But that combined mindset, to be honest with you, it's probably even that combined hardship that you've gone through, whether it be operations or even just training. That's one of the great things about the Royal Marines. Everybody trains in one location, which is the Commando Training Centre down in Devon. So you see each other as you go through, you see how people are treated, you all get treated to an extent the same way. But when it comes to Civvy Street, there are a number of leaders who shouldn't be leaders. And I can think of one particular person I worked for. I used to call him Teflon Ted. There's fuck all stuck to him. If there was shit flying around, certainly if he caused it, he didn't get any of it. None of it stuck to him. And he made sure of that and became, in the end, highly successful because he shat on everyone that he could. I remember there was one time when we were going for, we're having an assessment of our pay, and he hadn't. Ooh, isn't that lovely? Let's have a look. That bright shiny thing, as you can see, very, very nice, and he gets a good time. As I said, there was an assessment of our pay, and every other one of his subordinates got a cost of living increase, so an inflationary rise in their pay. But because he hadn't achieved his bonus, he gave me the square root of fuck all. Absolutely nothing. And I then went to his boss, who is or was the weakest individual going. And I explained it thoroughly, what had happened, how this guy was just being vindictive and a real twat. And his boss did nothing. Sat, listened, and that was it. And so it was at that point that I left this large New Zealand company and disappeared and went my merry way. And when I left, they had to replace me with 2 people. And it cost them twice as much because they had decided that they weren't going to pay me even a cost of living pay rise. I'd have taken that, not a problem. But they decided not even to do that. And that just shows. And I have to say, this guy, the biggest misogynist going. Absolutely. It was cringeworthy some of the times we used to walk through this business location. And he was the worst misogynist going. Anyway, that's by the way. Got away from him. Years later, I was in a restaurant, he saw me, and he did a double take. He did, I think it was do I know you? Yeah, you do, twat. You're the prick who was an idiot. Anyway, that's by the by. But that, for me, probably sums up a lot of it. I have had the fortune to have worked under a huge number of great leaders in the military, some of whom have gone on to great things, and actually served with and been friendly with a number of great leaders too, who, because obviously I left the military just as they were going into Afghanistan. But since then, a number of my friends have gone on to do great things in operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. But yeah, do you see how I'm saying this is a bit of a real ramble? But it's just really talking about how you approach leadership. And I think for an organization to do exceptionally well, I think there has to be a commonality in thought process. And it comes back to something that we've spoken about before, is mindset. You all have to be, if you're singing off the same song sheet, it makes for an exceptionally smooth organization. But what it also does is it allows those subordinates, shall we say, or those people who are further down the pecking order, to know how they're going to be treated, to know how their daily life, because don't forget, we all spend 8 hours a day at work. So you're talking 40 hours a week, and for most people, that's just the bare minimum that they do. So, yeah, and I've just realised I haven't put the gimbal on. Sorry, guys, my faux pas. This is going to be a very disjoint. I won't lose this one. Whoops, there we go. And then we're going to turn this gimbal on. Sorry, we will get there in the end. Shows how much of an idiot I am, doesn't it? Oops, we're going to go around and around and around. There we go. Now we're smooth. Now this is why it took time for me to sort out ramble as I ramble. Anyway, this is the raw, this is the unfiltered. And I should have realised that the gimbal wasn't on. Yep, I'm a novice. FNG, fucking new guy. I'm the one who gets this stuff wrong. But anyway, so for me, that was patently the difference between the leadership in certain organizations. And I know that organizations need to bring in new blood for them to fully change, adapt to situations, because things are constantly on the change. But to be honest with you, as long as you've got smart, good people at the top, change can happen that way too. Because I know that when one of my jobs that I had in the military was running the rehabilitation organization, and don't forget, the Royal Marines has always had a large dropout percentage. I think we're talking at least, sometimes we were having 50% dropout of recruits that had joined a troop, not passing out with that troop. And that's within the 30 weeks that training used to be. So if you've got that sort of dropout rate, that's huge. But we had to adapt that. I mean, I had some really, really good leaders. And there's one guy, Nick Lindley, who really was tasked with changing this. And he did that in a great way, and adapted and improvised things. And I'll tell you one of the things that we used to do with regards to that. Hey guys, how you going? Good. Another nice day. You too. So one of the things that Nick brought in was actually, how can we get these selected individuals and get them through to the end? Because these weren't idiots. They'd gone through a huge and very, very rigorous selection process just to get through the front door. And we were losing 50% of them. That's wasteful. Absolutely wasteful. So one of the things that he did is he adapted his thinking. And it wasn't just the standard, oh, they're not good enough, get rid of them, they're a bunch of fucking idiots. But one of the things that he targeted was the organization within the Royal Marines Commando training wing that I ran, which was called Hunter Company. And Hunter Company was the rehab unit. So if anybody failed, basically, we had a lot of injuries because we were pushing these guys. Where's the dog? Come on. We were pushing these guys to their absolute limits. We were pushing these guys hard to get physically ready. If you think about it, you're taking a young guy, it could be 16, could be 17, could be 18, could be even be 24, 25. We were taking them and thought, hey guys, how you going? Morning. So we were taking these guys from bare civilians and making Royal Marine Commandos out of them within 30 weeks, which is a steep learning curve, not only mentally, but physically, because some of these kids had only spent their lives wearing trainers. And that's what was happening. We were getting a lot of lower limb stress fractures, so metatarsal or toe stress fractures, and we were getting a lot of tibial or lower limb stress fractures, a lot of them, because we were sticking them in boots, sticking weight on their backs, and making them run on tarmac. So one of the things that he did is, right, okay, let's start looking at different aspects of training. So Nick was quite revolutionary in his thought process, and we started bringing in sports psychologists, because if you can imagine the stigma that was stuck to you if you'd failed an aspect of training, and it could be any aspect of training that you failed. As I say, it could be physical, and we were pushing them really, really hard, or it actually could be fieldcraft, or you weren't up to speed, or you weren't up to the standard, but you were close. Because every single week we were assessing these guys. At the end of every single week, we had an assessment. If we had an exercise that had been assessed, yes, you passed, yes, you failed. If there had been a physical setup, you've passed or you failed. So one thing that we did there is we brought a lot of good sports psychologists in. And I had a very, very good Sergeant Major, Clive, who took that on board and ran with it. And he helped. In fact, he was probably the major part of setting up the process that we had, where we started bringing in the sports psychologists into this. Because if you think about it, Royal Marines training is a bit like elite sports training. It's got a huge part of it is the mental mindset, and a huge part of it is the physical. So you can put them basically on a similar vein. But yeah, so anyway, that was my aside as to talking about you can actually get people within an organization who have a different mindset, who actually do help to develop and bring and push along an organization in its developmental phase. You don't have to bring fucking idiots in from elsewhere who have a self-centered mindset in order for something to change. And yeah, so that was basically, this ramble has come about purely from me watching Adam Driver talk about the difference from being a US Marine to being an actor. That's quite extreme. But obviously moving halfway around the world and changing from the military and turning it in, or going into a civilian setup, that's a big change too. And that was quite interesting. And certainly coming into New Zealand, so you're going from a population in the UK of 60 odd million, probably 63 million at the time when I left, all the way through to coming to New Zealand, morning, and there being 5.5 million people in the same area or land mass. So yes, so that was a very, very different piece, and then coming into a different mindset as well. So what I'm trying to say, guys, is in any part of life, you have to be adaptable. You have to be, and I'm not saying I'm the best person at adapting, but I've had a lot of experience of that sort of stuff. And certainly, one of the things that I did when I left this organization was I had the great saying, which was incorrect Latin, but it came through, or was designed by Merlin. Stop being a dick, come on. Was designed by people who really didn't know. It was basically pig Latin. Merlin, come on. Sorry, the dog's being a bit of a dick. We need to go get him. So, it's one of the things. Come here, stop being a dick. Yeah, sheepishly walking along. Anyway, so when on my leaving function, what I did was I came up with this Latin phrase, which is pig Latin, and I've since checked it through and found out that it's nothing like it. But I said, at the end of the day, what you got to realize is hic fute ludus militarum, which was supposed to mean fuck this for a game of soldiers. Which did draw a bit of a giggle. They didn't realise that I meant it, that the leadership of this organisation were a bunch of fuckwits and they shouldn't be leading anything, not even a piss up in a brewery. Anyway, so one of the things that you have to be in all of these sorts of situations is adaptable. You need to be able to adapt the way that you work to certain mindsets and certain groupthinks of different organizations. And that can be a struggle. Sometimes there are people who actually can't, and so their best thing is to find something that suits them. And one of the things that I found, and I found it a real struggle, I really struggle with working for fucking idiots. That could be just me. Maybe I'm the inflexible one. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I've gone out and pushed out on my own, because there's only one idiot that I work for, and that's me. And to such an extent that my boss has decided that this Christmas there isn't going to be a work Christmas function, and there hasn't been for the last 12 years. But it'd be my usual night out if it was. Me sitting in the corner of a pub, drinking half a pint of shandy. Anyway, I digress. I did tell you these rambles were going to be a real ramble. They may get better, or they may get worse. All right, but I just thought, it was just as I was coming in, is the difference between those sorts of things. And you can actually adapt that to anything that you do. There will always be idiots that you work for. There will always be idiots that you hang around. Always. And my son's, sort of my youngest son, has come up against that. One of the guys he's just recently worked for was an absolute fucking idiot. And he's realizing that now. And he realizes he can't take that personally. He just needs to adapt and move on and do his own thing. But anyway, yeah, sorry, it's a bit of a, a bit of a ramble, and nothing really of note came out of it. But hey, there's going to be some that are good, like bosses, and some that are bad. So you take your, come on, you take your choice and you go from there. Anyway, guys, what better way to have a day or to start a day than this day, if you think about it? 7 o'clock in the morning, shorts, t-shirt, and I'm still sweating. That's probably because I'm a fat bastard. But anyway, have a great day. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll stick this one up and you can skip it if you want. And I suppose I ought to do the standard YouTube thing and go, well, okay, like and subscribe. And then I can make more. And if there's stuff that you want me to talk about, put it in the comments section or below, and we'll see what we can do. Anyway, guys, take care and have a great day.